Good evening, everyone. Welcome. When you have a moment, or if you have a question during tonight's conversation, I encourage you to drop it in the chat, the comment section. I want this to be a very engaging conversation. Good evening. Welcome. Thank you to all of you for joining us. Hi, Jennifer. How are you?
I am glad to be with you, delighted to see you looking lovely and beautiful, and I'm ready for this conversation. I am literally at the dinner of the NAACP LDF, and so I'm sure that they're centering on this issue, the issue for our topic, our discussion tonight, like we are. But I had to come out and spend some time with you.
Oh, we appreciate it. We are so glad that you are at the dinner. LDF does amazing work, and it's so important that we
Hmm.
support them. Clearly, the conversation is going to be right on target. I mean, it's the thing that everybody is talking about.
And with good
Um,
reason.
yes, absolutely. Welcome to everybody that is kind of pouring into the conversation. I want this to be an engaging discussion. I know a lot of folks out there have questions, so you all please feel free to drop comments in the chat. Um, and we're going to get started. We do have another guest joining us, um, but we're going to get started, and hopefully we will see her soon. So good evening, all. I am Jerica Richardson, and I serve as a Senior Vice President of Equitable Justice and Strategic Initiatives at the National Urban League. And I want to welcome you to tonight's Justice Now conversation. We are going to be talking about an issue, as Jennifer mentioned, that is really garnering so much attention right now. We're talking about Roe versus Wade, and potentially um, the end of Roe versus Wade. We're talking about abortion rights. I know many of you probably saw it in the news that there was a leaked first draft of a Supreme Court of the United States decision on this very issue. I'm so excited to have Jennifer Jones Austin Esquire with us to break it down because there's a lot of nuance to this, and I really want to make sure folks understand. Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us. And for those of you who don't know Jennifer, although I'm sure so many of you that tuned in do, Jennifer serves as the CEO and the executive director for the Federation of Protestant Welfare Agencies. And so, uh, among many things, she's a talented attorney, radio host, speaker, I mean, just movement maker, activist, you name it. So, Jennifer, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for that beautiful introduction, making me feel good. I tell people all the time, no matter what they say, just remember I'm a child of God and we'll be okay.
Um, oh, perfect timing. Uh,
Hello.
Welcome. So we are just getting started, and we're talking about abortion rights. And so our second guest this evening, Dr. Alicia Leggett, has joined us. She is the founder and executive director of Empower Her Health LLC. Dr. Alicia is a board certified family medical doctor, and she is really here to bring some context to this really important issue. Dr. Alicia, I am so excited to have you. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Well, thank you for being here. Why don't we jump in? Before we talk about the issue, which I know is on everyone's minds, Jennifer and Dr. Alicia, do you want to just give folks a minute or two, tell us a little bit about your background in relation to this issue, what you do on the day-to-day, and why you think it's important?
Absolutely. If you don't mind, Dr. Alicia, I'll begin. Just give you a moment to catch your breath. So, as Jerica shared, I'm an attorney by training, and so I've spent, goodness, now nearly 30 years looking at interpreting and seeking to change laws to make them more effective and more beneficial for particularly those who've been marginalized and oppressed in this society. My work centers a lot on structural racism, the roots of inequity and poverty and how they relate back to structural racism. The reason that this topic is so relevant is for me is because what we've seen across the years is that, what's that line when America catches a cold, like Black communities, catch pneumonia? Well, the doing away of abortion rights is going to affect disproportionately women of color and low-income women of color. And so as someone who has centered her career on fighting for equity for the most marginalized, low-income persons and communities and people of color, when we begin to chip away at abortion rights, we know that it's going to impact these communities first and foremost in the most detrimental ways. And I'll just add, not because we're just out here getting more abortions just because, but because it's all it's all tied to structural and institutional racism and how we are perpetually placed in circumstances that work against us.
Well, thank you, Jennifer, and thank you for your leadership and your work. It's so important to have you really leading the charge in our community. Dr. Alicia?
Yes, and well said, Jennifer. So yes, I'm a family medicine physician by training. I was actually trained in the Bronx and in Harlem in New York City, and much of my work really centers around providing equitable care to communities of color, particularly Black communities and Latino communities. Much of my work with Empower Our Health has really centered around reproductive justice, reproductive health, and reproductive rights, specifically because my own birth experience as a Black birthing person and as a doctor was so traumatic, where I experienced many of the same things that we hear a lot of these highly publicized individuals who are sharing their stories speak about, which is not feeling heard, not feeling valued, not feeling validated, experiencing racism in their medical experience and experiencing implicit bias. And so much of my work really centers around trying to improve the patient experience, particularly for Black women, for reproductive age individuals of color along the gender spectrum, and really ensuring that we are training the next generation of doctors and providers in this lens of health equity, which is super, 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 super important. I'm also somebody, as a healthcare insider, who's always looking to critically examining what is wrong with our healthcare system and how we can fix it. Because it's really going to be the individuals that work within it that have the knowledge and the know-how about this very complex, cantankerous system that are going to have the solutions to fix what's wrong, which is, why is it that people of color fall through the cracks? And as as it's been reiterated already, we know that structural racism within healthcare has a huge role to play in that.
Yeah, can I just quickly add, I so much appreciate all that you've shared. And I was reminded very recently by my nearly 25-year-old daughter who has studied public health that, and this is what Dr. Alicia is speaking to, that we could even have healthcare, we could have a healthcare coverage, if you will. But because of structural racism and misogyny, all right, Black women, even with healthcare, are going to not be heard. And so this is what makes this issue all the more concerning.
Well, thank you both. I think let's jump right in. I really want to turn to you, Jennifer, to kind of unpack what's going on. If you could take a step back and talk a little bit about the Mississippi abortion case of Dobbs versus Jackson's Women Health Organization, and then drill down on what it actually means when we're talking about this leaked document.
Absolutely. So I'm going to begin by just centering on Roe v. Wade, which was a case that was decided by the Supreme Court in 1973. The case, the Supreme Court determined that women have a constitutional right to an abortion. And let me show you how they got there. Essentially, what the court determined was that under the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution, everyone has due process rights. And incorporated into due process rights is the right to privacy. The court then went on to say that what people do in their homes, what they do, like privately is their right. And so they extended the right to privacy to include the right to an abortion. Mm-hmm. In years since, the right to privacy has covered the right to contraception, the right to marry whom you desire to marry, the right to do things with your body and with your person that nobody has a right can infringe upon. So essentially, the 14th Amendment established due process, then in turn established the right to privacy, and within that, the Supreme Court said that abortion was a right, part of the right to privacy. When they decided that you had a right to privacy and then you had a right to an abortion, they didn't say that it was absolute. They put certain restrictions on them. And one of the restrictions was that a woman could not, have an abortion just, voluntarily, after the fetus was determined to be viable on its own. And they put that at the gestation period of 23 to 24 weeks. Mm. So you could voluntarily, without any having to show anything like related to rape or incest or harm to the individual, you could have an abortion on your own up to 23 to 24 weeks. Okay? That's what Roe v. Wade decided. Along come cases ever since 50 years challenging that. The Mississippi case essentially challenged by the state coming out and saying that a woman could not have an abortion on her own beyond 15 weeks. She couldn't just decide on her own to have an abortion after 15 weeks. That violated the U.S. constitutional right of having an abortion on your own choosing up to 23 to 24 weeks. So it gets challenged in the courts. And then a court upholds it. It goes all the way up to the Supreme Court to decide whether or not this state law and this state decision is now violating Roe v. Wade. What the Supreme Court had to do was to look at whether or not this Mississippi ban beyond 15 weeks was violating Roe v. Wade. They could have stopped there and said, yes, it's a violation. They could have even said, no, it's not a violation for X, Y, and Z reasons. But what this leaked draft shows us is that they've gone way beyond. And what Judge Alito has done, Justice Alito, and he's trying to get 4 other justices to come along and say is that there never was such a thing as a constitutional right to begin with. And so the Supreme Court, what they're trying to say is stare decisis does not apply, which says that, a settled law is now precedent, that Roe v. Wade was settled law and should be precedent. They're trying to say stare decisis, but that's not the case. That Roe v. Wade was bad law to begin with because there is no constitutional right. So let's just get rid of it. And when we get rid of it, we'll just turn it back to the states to decide, and every state can decide on its own because constitutional law becomes law of the land. So when they decide that the Constitution did not provide a right to abortion, then there is no law of the land unless you've got federal legislation and states can decide. That's what's happened here.
Thank you for the background, Jennifer. It was very helpful. Folks, I encourage you. I mean, we have 2 experts on here right now, so please, if you have questions, please drop them in the chat. Dr. Alicia, what would this mean? I mean, I'm sure for many women that are looking at this decision, what would you say to women who come to you about this that may have concerns? What does it mean for them?
Yes. So first, I would just want to start by backing up a little bit and just kind of looking at trends in abortion care in this country over the last 30 years, right? What we've seen in medicine in the last 20 years has been pretty revolutionary in terms of many long-acting, reliable forms of contraception that are available to prevent pregnancy. We have what I'm sure everyone has heard of, the IUDs, which are the implanted devices in the uterus. We have the Nexplanon bars, which are the implantable devices in the arm, which are, all of these were long-acting, and other forms of birth control like Depo patches, pills, and rings, which have come along and been revolutionary for many women who are seeking to actively plan their family. And when I say that, that means that people choose to have kids, whether they choose not to have kids, totally up to them. But this option is available for them. And what we've seen as more and more women have decided to be proactive about family planning is we have actually seen rates of abortion decline in this country. Since 2005, we've actually seen it go down by about 300,000 abortions per year over the last 2 decades, right? Without any sort of interventions, new laws, policies, anything preventing that. Solely because women want to plan their families in a more proactive way. So let's just start there, right? Also, keep in mind that abortion as used as a method for family planning is actually the method that is used the least, right? There's contraception, there's fertility awareness, there's other non-hormonal methods, there's many ways to prevent pregnancy, right? So we'll just start there. So when women come to me and they are pregnant and they don't want to be, this usually indicates that this is a somewhat serious, dire situation, right? This isn't a decision that people arrive at lightly. My patients just willy-nilly decide. This isn't also something that you can just characterize or make archetypes in your mind about what types of women take advantage of these types of procedures and these services. These are all women of all races, all ages, married, single, people who are divorced, all sorts of situations, right? And they're coming to me saying, this is something I can't do. Please help me to go to the next step, which is to terminate my pregnancy. Now, as a physician, regardless of what I believe, I took an oath to be able to help patients, to be there for them, to support them, and whatever the decisions they make about their bodies. And that's because I, as a physician, am obligated to respect their bodily autonomy. Am obligated to respect the decisions that they make for themselves and their families, right? Regardless of what I believe. So I just wanted to make it clear that when people come and they're having these procedures, it's something that's a choice that's private, and a decision that's very, very difficult for them to make. Now, I live in a state, in New York State. So in this state, it's very easy to obtain an abortion if you wish to have one, right? You can obtain surgical abortions, you can obtain medical abortions, and you can obtain them up until 24 weeks. As Jennifer explained, that is the precedent that was set by Roe v. Wade. So it's very easy to obtain. But, you know, with this leaked document, we're really seeing that, you know, this could really be damning for even in states like New York. Even though we tend to think that the implications are going to be far-reaching in the southeastern states, and then in even some parts of the Southwest and the Middle America, but really they have implications all over the country, right? Because in many of these states, there are no laws that really codify and protect the right to obtain an abortion, and that's a real issue. So I think for my patients, it's not so much of an issue, but in other places, it's extremely, extremely problematic.
Thank you for breaking that down, Dr. Alicia. Jennifer, I want to turn to you because this is really concerning. Folks may feel like they may not be impacted if they're in a quote unquote blue state versus a red state. But what recourse do we have? Is there anything that Congress can do to address this?
Definitely, definitely. The challenge really is Congress can act, but whether Congress has the votes to act, whether or not there really is the will to act. So, again, Roe v. Wade established abortion rights as a constitutional right. It's now being threatened as a constitutional right. But you can have federal legislation that authorizes and makes legal abortion across the entire United States. Just as we have a federal minimum wage, you can have a federal abortion right, and all states have to be subjected and have to live by that abortion right. Now, they can go beyond the rights provided with federal abortion legislation, but they cannot curtail the rights that are provided through federal abortion legislation. The challenge that we have is that in order to get that legislation without a filibuster, you need 60 senators to vote affirmatively for federal legislation. We do not have 60 senators who are willing to vote at this particular point for federal legislation. We don't even necessarily have 50 Democrat senators who are willing to vote for federal legislation. That's our problem. And you know, the debate right now is whether or not this leaked draft is now going to hurt Republicans as we move towards the midterm elections, and maybe you'll start to see some slippage, if you will, on the part of Republicans, and there'll be a break in that camp because the majority of Americans, not just Democrats, but the majority of Americans are in favor of a woman having the right to choose. And so it actually works against the Republicans right now to not be in favor of abortion. They may lose some people, but yes, this can be federally legislated. And if it isn't, which right now it appears that it won't be, then we're going to have to look to the states. And the challenge that we have is that, yes, there are some states that if Roe v. Wade is overturned, immediately they have what they call like these trigger laws, where immediately about 12, 13 states, we won't have abortion rights in those states anymore. Then there are 12, 13 more states that have ridiculous restrictions that then will curtail the rights even more. And then even in some of the blue states, you've got some archaic rules that are going to make it harder. And I just quickly want to add, part of our challenge too is that with communities of color and with low-income persons, very often abortions are pursued because people have lack of quality reproductive health care and education, and also because they're they are afraid, they can't afford to raise the child. We've got a whole lot of issues with us as a people and low-income people where, because of structural racism, we've been deprived fair wages. We've been deprived paid family leave. We can't take on another child. But what may happen is these persons now will feel forced to carry a baby because they also, if they don't have access to quality education about what their rights are, they may believe that this is happening all across the nation. Wow. Even people in New York, if they don't know what's what, they may think, oh my goodness, I'm hearing that Roe v. Wade's been overturned. I can't have an abortion anywhere. We're going to have a lot of back alley abortions.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that because we got a question from Ivy and Edward. The question was, will this take away all rights for an abortion, regardless of circumstances? So, Jennifer, what you were saying there is really going to depend on the state. And it's not going to be consistent across the board one way or the other.
No, one of the things that people aren't centering on, but a lot of corporations are centering on, is that this is going to have ripple effects. Every sector is going to be affected because, you've got organizations like Amazon. There are a few other organizations that are worried about people not wanting to live in certain states because their rights have been curtailed, their abortion rights. Is a woman going to want to relocate, or a family, to a particular state if their rights are restricted? And so that can affect business in significant ways.
Thank you for that. Dr. Alicia, can you chime in and talk a little bit about the impact, worst case scenario, what this looks like for our people, especially people of color that, as Jennifer lifted up, are often the most marginalized and those that might bear the brunt of changes like this?
Yes, absolutely. So I think it's really important to note that individuals who are impoverished and individuals of color will disproportionately bear the brunt of this. But we have to remember that really poverty changes something really innate in individuals, that it changes the way that they navigate their sexual life, right? So when patients come to me and they're speaking and they're impoverished and they're really speaking about how it is that they even engage in relationships with people. How you engage in a relationship with someone is going to be different if you don't have a place to live and you don't have food to eat, right? And so sometimes that can put you in situations that may, where you may get pregnant. And that's not a decision that you wish to, a choice that you wish to make. And so how it is that people are going to move forward and are going to obtain the services that they need is going to be far more difficult. Now, I think we're really seeing, in many of the southern states and in many of the states that have these trigger laws in effect, are some of the same states that are also trying to restrict access to contraception. Right. And we've even seen this with the ACA. When the ACA was passed or Obamacare was passed, there was this huge flurry around the contraception clause. Like, why is it that insurances are mandated to cover contraception? When for many of us in the healthcare field, we see this as just a part of preventative health, right? As part of being healthy, being able to choose your family, choose to plan your family. So I think it's going to have huge implications, especially for women who are poor, because it really robs them of their bodily autonomy. It really robs them of the ability to plan for their futures. It really robs them of the ability to decide how it is that the direction of their life will go, right? We also have to keep in mind that this procedure is exceedingly common. Over a third of women will undergo an abortion at some point in their life, right? So I think even for those individuals that speak about it as if it's just a rare thing, it is not. And as Jennifer mentioned as well, the vast majority of Americans support it, support keeping this right in place, because we understand that that might be one of us one day that needs to make that decision for ourselves. And like they say, what's good for the goose isn't necessarily good for the gander. You know, for people who call themselves pro-life or who don't believe it, that's fine if that's what you choose for yourself and your family. But let's not make that decision for everyone, because we don't know what everyone's situation is, right? For me as a doctor, I'm, you know, have come and had patient encounters with, you know, tens of thousands of patients over my career. And I can tell you that the human experience is extremely diverse, and you just never know when those situations are going to arise where you have to make those decisions for yourself. So we need to protect a person's right to choose what's right for themselves and their families.
Thank you for that. So one of the thoughts that come to mind for me is the potential criminalization of certain populations. Sharif put a note in a question in the chat that said, do black women run the risk of being targeted by seeking out family planning options? I'd love to hear from both of you about this.
So if we just speak first and foremost in the context of what may happen across the states, we saw in Texas back in the summer of last year that they were going to criminalize individuals and physicians providing abortions, and that they were also going to essentially incentivize individuals like, everyday private citizens to call them out.
Bounty hunters?
Bounty hunters, right. Individuals like private citizens. They did that to get around like the states acting to do it, which would have been in clear violation of the federal law. That's the reason that they did it. And so we have to remember first and foremost that in America, poverty is criminalized every day. Every single day. 40% of crimes are attributable to poverty. If you look at who's in our jails and in our prisons, overwhelming majority of the people who are in our jails and prisons are people who are impoverished. So yes, this will be yet another targeting of the poor, right? And if not for no other reason, just to make a statement and to also appreciate that America profits over people who are poor and criminalized. It's going to happen. Now, we don't yet know what's going to happen state to state with legislation, because aside from Texas, but you can be certain that states are then going to impose these laws that say if you travel across lines and it is found out that you've had an abortion, then you can be possibly prosecuted. They may determine that they may try to set up laws that the physicians in these states that are allowing persons to come in and receive abortions are committing crimes. It's going to get uglier.
Yeah, and also, I mean, thank you for that, Jennifer. Also, just to add to that, if we really look at, to answer the question about will Black women be targeted, if we really look at the history of this country and why it is that Black women ended up here in the first place, it was to reproduce. It was reproductive control and exploitation, right? So our country has a very long history of perpetuating reproductive exploitation, control, and coercion, right? Starting with, of course, slavery, and of course, continuing with sterilization campaigns through hysterectomies, unethical research practices that, where sexually transmitted diseases were spread in our communities, as we saw with the Tuskegee experiments, which, by the way, were studies that were mandated and paid for by the federal government, all the way up until, very recently what we've seen with, these mandated sterilization in ICE centers, right? So this issue of reproductive control continues to resurface decade after decade. There's a new, it's just kind of a new spin on it. So the question is, will Black women be targeted? We can look at a precedent and hypothesize that perhaps yes. So I just wanted to add that to what Jennifer had to say as well.
And I'll just add one point and say that, we can already look at the Roe v. Wade and who's going to be impacted. And just by that fact alone, appreciate who's going to be most impacted, that Black women are a target.
Well, I do want to give folks something positive that they can do. I mean, this is overwhelming. I'm sure there are a lot of people that are sitting back um, and they're scared about what the future looks like. But, at the National Urban League, we recognize how important it is to build movements and momentum. So what advice would each of you have for the everyday person that's watching this show right now that may not be a policy wonk or work as an advocate? What can they do to really lift their voice and help really bring a lot more attention to this critically important issue? And I want you to share, because our time is running to a close, if there's any final thoughts or words on this topic with our viewers. Clearly, there's so much to say, and we will have to have another follow-up conversation on this. But I do want to give folks just some food for thought about what they can do to weigh in and engage.
So I'll begin quickly and just first say I'll piggyback off of what Dr. Alicia said, just concerning who's impacted by this. Uh, get educated, help others to be educated about this. Everybody's going to be affected. Everybody, whether you, Dr. Alicia said, whether you are pro-choice or pro-life, you're going to be impacted because at some point or another, this really does touch home. Whether it be your child, your grandchild, your sister, even your mother. So be educated. But the one thing that I tell people that they need to do is vote. Vote like your life depends on it right now. And not just at the federal level, even though that's where it's going to hit first, but vote at the state level and at the local level. Get informed about where your potential elected officials stand on this issue, and then vote like your life, your daughter's life, your niece's life, your mother's life, your sister's life, your aunt's life, your girlfriend's life. Vote like their lives depend upon it.
I love that. We all need to be engaged citizens. Everybody's vote matters. Dr. Alicia, can you close us out?
Yes, indeed. So in healthcare, we know that civic engagement is very closely linked to health outcomes. So this is yet another reason to vote, because your health depends on it, right? And your life, of course. I just want to say that I think it's important that people know what is available to you. Please visit your doctor for your annual physicals, for your pap smears, for your preventative health screenings, because really it's going to be here where you can kind of learn about what I can do to protect myself, what I can do to ensure that I am not necessarily put in a situation where I have to make these decisions about an abortion, because contraception is readily available. For people, especially long-acting contraception that's very effective, very reliable, and very safe to use. So I would say that's first and foremost. There's lots of options, and a doctor can certainly counsel you through what would be best for you and your family based on your medical conditions as well. The second thing I want to say is it's just important for individuals to know, like, if there's an abortion provider in your area, and if so, know who they are and how to support them, right? Because it's really going to be the local citizens that kind of keep the, keep those places running, that support them financially, that support them through political action, and through civic engagement as well. So I think that, is of course hugely important. And of course, vote, vote, vote. Very important.
Well, thank you, ladies, so much. Those were really important guidance that you've given us. Thank you for educating us on the topic. Unfortunately, this is going to be something that we're going to continue to discuss and that we're going to follow. And it's so important that everyone really pays attention and engages. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your work. Thank you for your service. And I look forward to having you all back again. And to all of those who have joined us, remember, the time for justice is always now. We look forward to seeing you next time. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.